Good morning. I'd like to make this as informal as we can. Certainly if you have questions, please let me know. The CPAG, Certified Professional Agronomist, means I jumped through the hoops of the American Society of Agronomy. Okay, I was asked to talk about herbicide drift. It's reasonably straightforward. There's two kinds of drift, the droplets, and then there's a vapor. The very fine droplets result from the spray nozzle that the party who's putting it on is using. It's a function of the spray nozzle and the pressure. And obviously not all particles coming out of that nozzle are the same size. The larger, more heavy droplets stay where they're put. The fines, or the little ones, have a tendency to drift, which you're well aware of the problems that causes. The other part of the issue is vapor. Now, the 2,4-D and Banville class of chemicals have the nasty habit of vaporizing after they've been put on. Could be put on day one. But if day two is above 80 degrees, maybe it gets to 100, some of that chemical will evaporate, get into the air. And as a gas, it can float for miles. It's very dependent upon the formulation. The new dicamba, they advertise that it's not supposed to vaporize. That's not quite correct. We've got several cases where it's come off 2 or 3 days later and done damage. Several years ago, the University of Washington documented, it was 2,4-D, but it drifted about 17 miles, got into a vineyard, came off of a wheat field. So once it gets in the wind, there's nothing to stop it. So when you have an invasion, what can you do? How do you protect yourself economically? And what are your options? So we're going to look at some of those. How many are registered with the Do Not Spray registry? Okay, that's a super good first step. I'm learning from experience when I've talked to some of these floater operators. Did you check the registry? What are you talking about? So it's not being used as well as it should. But that leads us up to the next part. Visit with the potential applicators. It could be your local neighbor, it could be the co-op, it could be a spray jockey. There's just countless number of people that spray herbicides that probably should be more careful. And some of them are harder to deal with than others. I might comment that the energy companies have a cap on what they will pay for liability. Had a situation near Lexington, Nebraska. Nebraska Public Power sprayed with, I think it was Tordon, but it got into a vineyard. Approximately $4 million worth of damage. Well, NPPD said, well, that's tough. We'll pay $1 million, no more. Well, the vineyard operator had a little choice but to take it. But he was kind of sore about it, and I don't blame him. Probably good relations are your best defense. If everybody knows you've got a high-value crop out there, particularly if you're a vegetable producer during the summer, you can really get a lot of money wrapped up in short order there. And if the people truly understand, you may have told them, but did they totally comprehend the value of your crop? It might make them be a little more careful. None of us really like attorneys, but they're a fact of life. And my suggestion is talk to an attorney before you need him or her. Develop a plan of action. Get your protocol laid out. if this happens, I'm going to do these things. It's kind of a CYA situation. But how many of you have a company attorney that you work with on a regular basis? Don't see a lot of hands. One. I sure recommend it. Get to know him before you need them. Because then when you've been hit and you got a problem, it's a little late to put everything together. Develop your protocol, know what you're going to do before. When you're talking to this attorney, review the fees, know what he'll charge, what they will do for you, what they will not do, what kind of time frame they could work with. Some of them will put you off, others are on it that afternoon. Find out if he'll push the insurance company of the applicator. Nobody wins when you end up going to litigation. When I say nobody, I think the attorney's the only one that really comes up with much money. Some insurance companies are really good. Others are really stinkers to get money out of. And here might be the time to talk about the adjuster. If you get a person from the city out to look at your agricultural problem, they may or may not understand agriculture. I believe you've got a right to request that company send you out an adjuster that knows agriculture. When you talk to some of these city adjusters, you can see their eyes glaze over and you realize this is not going well. Okay, documentation. One of the problems I run into is I'll ask somebody, can you prove your production? And regretfully, a lot of them cannot. They have no idea how many units of this or that they sold at the farmer's market. And one of the first things the insurance company wants is proof that you have the ability to produce what you're claiming. And they'll want to look at your previous records. So know how many pounds of tomatoes you produce per plant if you're growing vegetables, or how many bushels per acre you've produced from your corn for the last 4 or 5 years. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think they would accept farmers self-reporting, or do you think they would want to have third-party kind of scale?
Most of them self-reporting is acceptable. You may have to show elevator receipts or a documentation that you sold so many bushels here and so many bushels here. They will ask for documentation. Now, I'm finding people selling at farmers markets don't keep their books as well. They may know what their daily intake was, but they may not be able to tell you how many units of this or that they sold. And I've spent some time trying to figure that out on a couple of cases. Eats up a lot of my time, and I'm not sure we're right. We just give it the best try. Sometimes I'm not sure. I don't feel comfortable that I've got the answer, even though I put down a number and given to the attorney or given it to an adjuster. Know your production costs. Know what it costs you to produce a bushel of this and a bushel of that. And know what it costs you to be certified. I'm aware of a case down in Arkansas right now. They're arguing over the value of the time the man spent getting certified. And I never really thought about that until I was visiting with this attorney. And he cannot find any record of the law where somebody has figured this out before. So as you put together your cost of production, what does it cost you to become certified? You may have to kind of prorate your annual certification fees against bushels or head, however you feel comfortable doing it. But as long as you can document it, that certainly helps. Then have it organized when you're going to present it to the adjuster or the attorney. Use your accountant if you need to. They may be better at putting this stuff together. You've got the numbers, but maybe the accountant will think more of how to organize it to present it to another party. Pre-season activities. Figure out what laboratory you'll probably use if you get a chemical invasion. Now, the state will come out and look at your problem, but the mandate the state is given only goes so far. You're on your own to prove your loss. You can find this on the internet. There's quite a few laboratories that do herbicide testing. There's one out of South Dakota that's probably the most common. But I would urge you to talk to these laboratories, get their fee schedule, because it's going to become up to you to prove you got hit with this chemical and the rate of the chemical. The State Department of Agriculture, get their fee schedule. They'll send you some supplies if you want to use that laboratory, and understand the procedures, how to collect your samples, and how to ship them. Long story about shipping them. I digress. One laboratory said, well, be sure you insulate the box well and put dry ice in it. So I put the sample in it. I took this expandable foam, what's it called? You get a little spray can.
It's an insulation.
I put one box in, I sprayed the insulation around the box. I put the one box in a second box, sprayed insulation around it. Put dry ice in the smaller box, put the sample in the dry ice, and sealed it. And a couple days later, the lab calls me, says, how did you get that sealed so tight? The dry ice froze the insulation. They literally had to cut the boxes open. So use a better procedure than that.
They're cold.
They will tell you it got there cold, but totally frozen. We'll cover photo documentation a little later. Photograph your damage. Record where you took the photos. There's several GPS programs on your telephones. You don't need to buy an expensive camera with GPS on it. Your little telephone will do a good job. If you discover you've got chemical invasions, write down as soon as you know what you got, the weather information, and what was the odor. Some of these are pretty distinctive. I think once you smelt the aroma of Banville or 2,4-D, you never forget it. So write that in your little daily log. Collect from different parts of the farm. If you think it come from the east, get your samples over on the east, but pull some samples from the west also. What you're looking for is a difference in concentration. Hopefully it didn't go clear across your farm. Hopefully it just came short distance and stopped. But don't miss something that you think later on you should have done. Like I said, that I should have done this thought later on really hurts. Okay. Collect your samples per laboratory instructions and put them in the freezer for later use. That doesn't cost you much to put them in the freezer. Then call the state and say, we've got a chemical invasion. How many have had to call the State Department of Ag to come look at an issue? One person? 2? 3? 4? Okay. The state really needs to know that you've had an invasion. And each state handles it a little differently, but at least it's on record that from somewhere you got some chemical. You know, if you know where it come from, it's probably good public relations to go talk to that farmer and say, hey, some of your chemical got into here. My plants haven't started to curl yet, but I can tell it's here. And that kind of comes down to PR, how well you and that neighbor get along, or you and that co-op, whatever. That's kind of a personal issue, how you handle that. Some farmers just really get bent out of shape when you tell them that came from there, and the other says, I'll get a hold of my insurance company. I didn't mean for this to happen. So, broad spectrum of how that goes. But be sure and report that you had a drift. This one's kind of a sore spot with a lot of people. The law for the state departments are only to investigate, did the applicator violate the FIFRA label? And that's pretty much a yes or no. If it got into your property, somebody had to violate the rules. Because it says right on that label, don't let it get on plants that shouldn't be. But the state's only responsibility is to say, applicator Joe did or did not screw up. The state is not responsible to help you get economic damage from that application. That is your responsibility. And that's why you collected the samples as soon as you thought you'd been sprayed. The chemicals start to break down the minute they touch the plant. So the quicker you get that sample in the freezer, the better assay you'll get if you send those on to the laboratory. It's better to take more samples than you send to the laboratory than to not take enough. When I was putting this together, somebody, maybe my wife, asked about what this FIFRA calls for. It's merely, did they follow the instructions on that label? Okay. Again, I'm reiterating, the state doesn't have to help you recover financially. They just find the guy that did it, or they do not find the person who's done it. Okay. I guess I'm kind of repeating myself here that you have to prove your loss. Okay? If it looks like you've got a big loss, you may need or want to bring in a third party to look it over and document it. And have that person write a report. This way your self-interest is not the sole presenter of the damage. Some extension people will come out and do it for you. Other states just do not let their extension people get into these situations. That's a state-by-state call. Take pictures, take good pictures. During the winter, learn to use your camera on your phone, or if you've got another camera, you really need to know how to use that camera. I get so many pictures. Somebody stood at the corner and took a picture. Take a position shot. There's a grain bin. There's that post. There's some things in the background. If you go to the next one now, I turn just a little bit. The post is still there. There's some grain bins in the back. Those are going to be there later on. If somebody wants to go out and look at the site where you stood to take the picture, they can do it. Now we're going to do the same area, only closer. You get a general idea where we're looking for the problem. You can see there's some weed issues there, but there's not a whole lot of detail you can tell from that slide yet. Okay, same thing. We're looking at the grapevines. There's the damage, but you can't tell a whole lot from this photo. You know it's in the grapevine, there's some grapes. Then we're going to get close up to the subject. And this is the one where most photographers become blurry. Now, you can pretty well pick out individual kernels if there was smut on there or an issue. you can see it. Most of you will recognize that as a Banville or 2,4-D damage. Now that's going to tell somebody that the damage you're trying to show them. Photo documentation may be your best way to tell your story. Use something as a reference to indicate the size of what you're dealing with. In this case, the ruler and the grapevine. Here's a little program, and I don't remember what it costs. It's fairly cheap, that you can put on your cell phone. And it puts a longitude, latitude, time, and date right on it. If somebody would like a copy of this, I'm more than willing to put it somewhere so you can download it. I'm kind of partial to big rulers. You can lay that on the ground. You've got a good reference point. It's cheap. I've planted a few of those in the fields. I planted a lot of pocket knives out in the field. The embroidery hoop works too. Depends upon what you're doing. If you need to count the number of weeds in a given area, border embroidery hoop works. But anything for a solid...
The one that you took in for random, you tossed it out. So
that and a Frisbee.
more of it lit.
We were doing population counts one day in the field, so we had a Frisbee in the back of the car, so I threw it out and said, that's my random sample. And put the embroidery hoop over that circle and counted the weeds. Well, I went over this pretty quick. That's kind of my story. Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, thank you.